Welcome back. Today you're going to learn all you need to about the launch of Manor Lords, which has been a truly astounding story. It's the 6th biggest launch of 2024, 173,000 peak concurrent players, over 1 million copies sold in just a few days, and an 89% positive rating on Steam. And do remember, that rating is from people who have purchased the game. So these are astounding stats, and that's without us even thinking about other platforms, like, say, Game Pass. Game Pass actually could be decently major here because this is on Game Pass for PC. That means so many people actually just also get a copy of this, to them anyway, for free. It's all pretty crazy. This is a game from one developer taking 7 years and a publisher that basically came in the final stages to ensure that that vision is actually delivered in a way that just kind of couldn't happen with a big AAA publisher. It's a hell of a success, and it shows us what this industry can do. Ultimately, one of the most successful games of this year, and no doubt one of the most profitable in terms of like percentage of development cost, is a historically authentic take on like small regional conflicts in Central Europe. Like, that is absolutely awesome. I mean, people are just excited about crop rotations, just like I'm rotating into today's sponsor read. Boot.dev, here's the deal. Their mission is to teach you back-end web development, which is an amazing skill, using Python and Go, which are fantastic things to learn. And I mean, hey, this is a field where like your average back-end dev's getting 100 grand in the US, and like with really good perks, like, you know, working from home and all that stuff. Boot.dev itself has got quests, levels, achievements, like RPG elements itself, and you can get 25% off your first purchase by using my link and code, which is Bellular News. Now, their approach is very pragmatic, it's very wise, and that's because it comes from pros in the field, and it's designed to teach you the fundamentals right through to the sorts of things you will actually be doing in a real back-end development job. And they're always adding new content. As an example, they have a new course on shells and terminals, which is actually really fun. I mean, here's their description of that. Quote, acting as a cyber forensic investigator inside the file system of a megacorp World Bank. So yeah, if you want to, you know, fling up terminal and start doing some Mr. Robot shit, that's actually what that module was designed for, which I thought was really cool. Anyway, now you can check them out today at boot.dev/Bellular News, where your first purchase will be 25% off if you use my code, and that's backed by their no questions asked 30-day money-back guarantee, and they got free demos of all their courses. So cheers, Boot. Let's roll with the video. To kick it off with the headline numbers then, the peak concurrency is 173k. This all was at the weekend, where this game was comfortably the top seller on Steam's global list. Now, see that list? That is by revenue, right? So if you ever wonder why the index is there or Steam Decks are there, it's because they're obviously pretty expensive. So revenue-wise, they are really, really powerful. So the Manor Lords can dethrone all of that is incredible, and we've got more numbers because per the publisher, they hit 1 million sales within a day of release. And again, that is crazy because you then have got to put Game Pass for PC on top of that. And this is all the more interesting because city builders are dime a dozen in Steam. There's absolutely loads of them. We've got Foundation, Furthest Frontiers, Ostriv, and then if you go all the way back, you've got the likes of Banished, which really did help to revitalize the village builder in 2014, which, just in case you want to feel a bit older, was a decade ago. A rather horrible thought. Manor Lords itself is very much in early access, so how can it actually penetrate the market? Like, what's actually going on? What's making this unique? What's setting it apart? And if you're only wandering into this video, having not played it and you're interested, well, essentially, by reducing the scale and doing that at a really strong level of detail, they essentially just create a toy that you can be wholly engrossed in. Actually doing micromanagement feels amazing and will vampire your time. The other side then is setting, and look, a sort of medieval, you know, European setting. That's the sort of thing that you do see a lot of. In this case, it is just that they really do hit an extremely strong level of historical authenticity, which the developer himself, Greg Stitchin, was very clear to say is not accurate. He says that the game is inspired by history. Even historians advise that I should avoid using the term historically accurate because nothing truly is. So yeah, you can do that and maybe save yourself a few of the actually comments that you may otherwise get. But when you're playing the game, you'll notice that it is quite distinct compared to some other games, like the more hardcore ones like Ostriv or Workers and Resources. Gameplay-wise, you essentially have got the very deeply meditative qualities that turn a city builder into a hyperbolic time chamber. I'm sure you all know what that is like. An entire evening can vanish in maybe the time of like 1 or 2 in-game years of development. So it's doing the bread and butter of the genre well. I think where it does start to come into its own a little bit more is just the look and feel of the RTS style combat, right? When you actually muster up your villagers and you start combat. Even the small things of like looking at your villager. How does your villager outfit himself for the battle based on your own economy? All of those details work, packaged in a way that, as an example, very obviously caught the eyes of the Total War fans, right? So it did a really, really good job of that. And then, I suppose, sticking on Total War, but maybe also appealing to the sorts of people who'd perhaps enjoy Crusader Kings, well, all of the small-scale politicking and land claims, that kind of thing. Again, when you reduce the scope and just kind of do detail, you just end up having a hell of a lot of meaning. And I almost think, say, what some people will say about like a combat system in something like World of Warcraft, the modern version of it, there's a lot of abilities. It's all very fast-paced, and I do happen to quite enjoy that, but for a lot of people, you cannot beat it when it was slower, some ways perhaps a little bit more simple, and because of that, every small little detail, be it the swing timer, very specific minutiae of your positioning, you feel like those can matter more, because when there is less noise, you're able to pay attention to what is there. I think that's one of the things that has just worked so well in this game's favor, along with another thing that's very important, and that is polish. Manor Lords is a mostly polished and fun to play game. There is some crashing, there are some early access bugs, but it's not to the degree of many other games. And when we're looking at early access launches, I think a very major thing is you actually need to have it feel like a great polished experience, just one that is smaller than what the game will be at the end of the early access period. So the lesson for us all to take away from this is to have a mostly polished core version of your game that a player can just really play through to an excellent level of quality, which I do think is there in Manor Lords, rather than having things obviously be quite a test. Again, think about something like Dave the Diver. They had their core gameplay loop at the start of the early access period, and as time went on, they were adding in more layers of gameplay, more features, but it was all built off a base that on day one people very much enjoyed, and I think that's what makes me the most excited about Manor Lords. Now, with some game essentials done, let's just talk about the meta story here, because this is part of a far, far wider narrative, and certainly floating in and around a game like Manor Lords, you do have a lot of player frustrations. There's a lot of that going on in the Total War scene, right? Obviously, Total War Warhammer's had its problems. There's a large contingent of people who want Medieval 3. Now, obviously, this game is not Medieval 3. It is not even trying to be that, but it does have a Venn diagram that overlaps. You then take a look at even some of the Paradox games where they have managed to alienate quite a lot of their own audience. And it's not that their failures directly lead to this success, but I think that those failures and struggles lead to a situation where there is fertile soil for something like this game to come up. And what's striking to me is the mimetic potential of all of that. So we had a video go surprisingly viral. I just thought, okay, this developer has got a reasonable message about early access. This is a game that I care about, that I'm interested in. Let's talk about the developer, essentially saying, hey guys, you know, you're not going to be conquering all of Europe. You're not going to be leading 4,000 Crusaders. You're not going to be doing these things in our game. And I was shocked that video was able to go so far in the YouTube algorithm. That is something that I do think actually matters. Just so that you understand, the way that YouTube works, it's less that it pushes your content out. A lot of YouTubers will say, oh, the YouTube algorithm is just not pushing my content out, and that's why I'm failing. No, it's about viewership patterns. It's more that whenever a viewer hits the refresh button, it pulls content over to their homepage based on what they're likely to watch. And that essentially means that whenever a lot of people are just, say, interested in a topic, it just means that your video can be sucked into the algorithm that way and do super well. And that shows a baseline level of virality that I do think is a pretty strong leading indicator of a success like this, which does make complete sense. When you look at Manor Lords, there is something about the minutiae of that game that has allowed it to spread incredibly, and a part of that is the developer is humble. It's a solo dev. Obviously, that's something that people want to get behind. But even looking at the specifics of the game, the click-through rate on thumbnails for this game are good. Whenever you see a thumbnail that's got a little bit of the game UI in it, it looks sleek. It's all of those things that just help that snowball get bigger and bigger and bigger and roll down the hill to the tune of 1 million day one sales, which again is absolutely insane. To get into the situation with Hooded Horse, so the popular narrative is that Manor Lords is a passion project game made by a single dev over 7 years. The dev has been very open and clear with really the whole timeline. And I do think that when you look at the game, you see that. Just looking at little things like the UI, the presentation, you see what happens in the case of so many games, right? Is they get a publisher, maybe they get one too early, and rather than sit there and iterate and iterate and iterate, their production pipeline, it may only have room for a few iterations of something to the point where you basically have to say, okay, I'm not happy with the UI, I'm not happy with this, but unfortunately, in order to pass our next milestone, we've got to get these different things shipped. That's it, sorry, we cannot change it anymore, and away we go. Whereas in a situation like this, you clearly have someone who's just been able to refine and refine and refine. Fundamentally, I think in a way where a larger team with a deadline kind of just can't. And I think if there is any lesson to take away from that, it's not to do everything as a solo dev. That is something you can do, but more, I think it is pre-production. And I think pre-production is one of the things that just leads to the most heartache in indie projects. Now, to go through this development story, yes, it was starting off as a solo, right? But that's not the full story. So, Slavic Magic, the name of the studio, which, I mean, yeah, is technically a dude, but he was pretty quick to explain that, well, he brought pros in to handle work where it would be beneficial. Things like motion capture, things like assistance and art from pros. And also, 7 years. There have been GIFs and screenshots on Twitter for a long time. Also, they received an Epic Games Mega Grant at some point after those were starting in 2019, and that's because the whole game is made in Unreal Engine 4. So ultimately, with the likes of that and the Patreon, he was able to stop doing video production commissions and basically go onto this project full time. And of course, that funding means you can get pros to do the things that, you know, they're professionals at, like art, like, you know, mocap, things like that. And I think there's a really interesting example here of using that very, very hard-hitting talent, but in a way that is cost-controlled. Because I think what has been achieved here, it's kind of remarkable in that you're getting a lot of extremely high-quality stuff. The sorts of quality that you often don't really see from a solo dev just because, you know, hours in the day. But you're still seeing the level of iteration and refinement that does kind of come from something being somebody's like one passion project. So it's really those things have just worked out fantastically, and they have created an amazing meta-narrative that means that this is a game that everybody wants to see succeed, because it essentially represents exactly what we want, what we respect, perhaps idealize, right? Some sort of mythical vision of game development it has been able to achieve. I think all of that is perfectly wrapped up in the developer's response to things over the weekend. So in the middle of doing bug fixes and the crazy launch success, and undoubtedly I'd hope some celebrations, well, the game's Discord got a questionnaire about whether a certain mechanic needed tweaking for balance reasons. So even then, the developer's like, all right, there's a lot of people playing the game, let's try and make it better. That's the sort of thing that, again, endears somebody to an audience. There's a quote from the CEO of the publisher Hooded Horse. The things that Greg cares about most are the game being good and players being happy. That's where his focus is. This weekend showed that. And that brings me to the final thing, which is the publisher, seemingly one that has actually got the best interests of its developers and its audience in mind. At the very least in this situation, the sort of platonic ideal of the publisher-developer-player relationship is being realized here with how Hooded Horse have done things, and I think that's worth bringing up because we can all, I think, readily imagine a game that looks to be a viral success and a publisher swooping in at the last moment and maybe, you know, trying to get the game across the line, maybe asking the dev to alter the game, or maybe just being so focused on overt money making, you know, right now as is possible, or some sort of bad thing. I mean, after all, this has been the most wish-listed game on Steam for ages. That does mean that any publisher goes near here is going to get, like, guaranteed a big win. And I think that's actually why Hooded Horse deserves some credit here. There's things a lot of people maybe don't know about. This game was delayed by 6 months from October of last year, and before that it was actually delayed by a full year. So this is a game that has been delayed for a year and a half, and explaining that again, their CEO Tim Bender said, "We could have released it back then. People have been clamoring for a release ever since the October 2022 demo. That demo, part of Steam Next Fest, was what really set Manor on its path to success. Sitchin, and again, sorry if I do his name wrong, and Hooded Horse committed to taking another year before release and then adding another 6 months after that. Quote, it was really not about when can we release or what's the shortest time we can release it in, it's what's the minimum thing that we can try to offer, but really doing our best to really deliver a good experience, essentially striking the ideal balance." The specter of a different city builder, a slightly more modern one that launched in October 2023, appears in my head. We've also got the dev's own perspective in an interview that was done for Unreal, where he says, "I wasn't initially interested in publishing, but he kept helping me out with various problems and gave really great advice. Eventually, I just saw that it might actually be useful and actually increase sales. Looking back, it truly was a great decision. I'm not sure if everyone needs a publisher, but it did increase wish lists." One way to think about it is, do you want to sit down and send 1,000 emails to all the press before launch, optimize tags and stores, and sit in calls with partners? For me, I learned to greatly appreciate that I can focus on the actual development tasks instead. And whenever you have a publisher who is working with you in that good way, it's, yeah, pretty incredible. There's a lot of things that you don't have to do. Again, we had a really good publishing relationship in games. I've also seen that very much not be the case. The likes of publishers wanting features to be changed, wanting parts of a creative vision to be changed, or just having so much red tape, production meetings, and endless stuff that the publisher inadvertently ends up making the game they're publishing far more challenging and far less financially efficient to develop. So it does seem that this is really publishing done right. And since we last talked about Hooded Horse, well, something has come to light about their corporate bylaws. And I know that really doesn't sound like an interesting thing, but trust me, it is. This is an interview with GameFile's Stephen Totilo, and they are essentially talking about, well, as a publisher, how do they run things? And it got onto the topic of profit. And where it's interesting is that Hooded Horse legally do not have to seek profit at the expense of anything else. To quote, "Everyone says, oh, corporations are bound to always make more profit for shareholders," Hooded Horse co-founder Tim Bender recently told me. "Yes," he added, "unless you put a line in," and at Hooded Horse, they put a line in. That line being a line in their company bylaws that makes that clear. Pretty awesome, actually. That's a form of mission-driven, like, hey, we exist for good strategy games, that I kinda love. And I think that just ultimately adds more to the whole meta story about Manor Lords and basically everything around it. It's a game that people have wanted for years, and it's a publisher who wants to see the game be supported, not exploited, right? Not stripped for parts, stripped for resources. They've put their money where their mouth is by funding a year and a half of additional development that they probably didn't budget whenever the initial production schedule was drafted up. Ultimately, what have they got from making that sacrifice? They've got 1 million sales on day one. Mine was one of them, and funnily enough, once I hit the stop recording button in this camera, guess what I'm going to do as soon as I get back? I'm going to continue playing Manor Lords, because it's fantastic. That's it from me. If you want to support the show, of course, do check out today's sponsor, and, well, we have many videos coming up. There's a lot of spicy things going down. So, have fun. See you next time.